In the end, the situation reached far beyond that small store. By the time the winter sun dipped behind the low rooftops of the neighborhood, something had already shifted, even if no one could explain what it was. Brightmart closed its doors at the usual hour. The lights inside went dark, one row at a time, and the glass windows reflected the gray sky like nothing unusual had happened. From the outside, it looked like any other small grocery store in a working-class American neighborhood. Quiet, forgettable, harmless. But the people living nearby felt it. They felt it in the way conversation stopped when someone mentioned the store, in the way doors closed a little faster than usual, in the way eyes lingered too long, then quickly turned away. Aisha Carter walked home alone. Her coat was pulled tight around her body, though the cold was not the reason she was shaking. Snow crunched under her boots with every step, loud in the stillness of the street. She kept her head down, not because she was ashamed, but because she could feel herself being watched. Not openly, not aggressively, just enough to make the air feel heavier with each block. Her right wrist throbbed beneath her sleeve. A dark bruise had already begun to bloom there, deep purple creeping into blue. Her cheek was swollen, tender to the touch, the skin tight and warm despite the freezing air. She had tried not to look at her reflection in the darkened storefront windows, but she caught it anyway. One glance was enough. She did not recognize herself. At the apartment building, Mrs. Whitman from downstairs paused at the mailbox when she saw Aisha enter. Normally, she smiled and asked about work, about the weather, about nothing in particular. Today, she only nodded. Her eyes dropped briefly to Aisha's wrist, then back up again, uncomfortable. Behind the thin walls of the building, voices traveled easily. Someone whispered that a cashier had caused trouble. Someone else said the police had been involved. Another voice insisted it was probably exaggerated, but said it softly, as if not fully convinced. No one knocked on Aisha's door. Inside her apartment, the heat hummed steadily, doing nothing to calm the tightness in her chest. She dropped her keys on the table and leaned back against the door, closing her eyes. The silence pressed in around her, louder than any argument, louder than any raised voice. She replayed fragments she could not fully piece together. The look on a stranger's face, the sudden space around her at the counter, the way time seemed to slow, then rush forward all at once. Her body reacted before her mind could, flinching at sounds that were no longer there. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from a coworker she barely spoke to. Just checking in. Crazy afternoon, right? Aisha did not reply. Outside, a car idled longer than necessary near the curb. Its headlights stayed on, casting pale light across the snow and up the side of the building. After a minute, it drove off. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and chose not to say anything. Later that night, Aisha stood at the sink, staring at her reflection in the darkened window above it. She touched her cheek gently and winced. Her wrist ached when she moved it, but the pain was not what unsettled her most. It was the feeling that followed her into every room, the sense that something had been set in motion without her consent, that whatever had happened did not belong only to that store, or that afternoon, or even to her. Down the hall, a neighbor laughed at a television show. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed and faded into the distance. Life, it seemed, was continuing as usual. Aisha turned off the kitchen light and stood in the darkness for a moment longer than necessary, listening to her own breathing, trying to convince herself that this would pass, that tomorrow would be normal, that the stares would fade, that the whispers would stop. At the time, Aisha still believed it was just a bad day at work. Earlier that day, the world still felt manageable. The noon rush at Brightmart had its usual rhythm, the soft beep of scanners, the rustle of plastic bags, the low murmur of tired voices counting loose change and watching the clock. Outside, gray clouds pressed low over the neighborhood, promising snow by evening. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the smell of coffee and disinfectant. Aisha Carter stood behind register 3, her posture straight, her movements precise. She had been on her feet since early morning, but she never rushed. Every item placed neatly, every total read clearly, every customer acknowledged with the same steady courtesy. She believed in rules, not because they were perfect, but because they were something. A thin line between chaos and fairness. First in line meant first served. No exceptions. That was how she kept order. That was how she kept herself safe. A man in a construction jacket thanked her for double bagging his groceries.
You're safe.
An elderly woman smiled when Aisha helped her count coins. Small moments, ordinary moments.
I'm still here.
Proof, she believed, that decency still worked if you practiced it long enough. Then the
This isn't
door
over.
swung open. Cold air rushed in, sharp and sudden, and several heads turned at once. Officer Daniel Grady stepped inside, snow clinging
It
to
is
his
for me.
boots. His uniform stretched tight across his broad shoulders. He did not remove his hat. He never did. People
It's
noticed him
ours.
the way animals notice a shift
This
in the
is
wind.
ours.
Grady was known in the neighborhood, though not for the reasons a police officer should be. He had been the subject of
I'm
complaints
ready.
before. Rough hands, sharp words, too quick to escalate. Earlier that
Take
same
your
morning,
time.
someone had filed another report after he had shoved a young black man against a patrol car downtown. The report would be reviewed later. Always later. Grady's jaw was tight as he walked in. His eyes scanned the store, not looking for groceries, but for something else. Or someone. The line at the counter was long.
I'm
A
home.
black man stood at the front, holding a basket close to his chest. He looked tired, careful, like someone used to staying small in public spaces. Grady did not slow down.
Evening.
He stepped forward and shoved past the man, his shoulders slamming into him hard enough to make him stumble. The basket nearly
Just
tipped.
tired.
Move. Grady said it loudly, his voice thick with contempt. I'm paying first. The store went quiet in a way that had
quiet.
nothing to do with silence. The man looked toward Aisha, eyes wide, asking without speaking. Aisha felt her chest tighten. She had seen this before.
That wasn't
Not
me.
this exact moment, but the shape of it. Power leaning forward, waiting to be fed. She placed the item
It
she
was
was
a
holding
long
on the
shift.
counter and met Grady's stare. Her voice was calm even as her heart picked up speed.
Why is
Sir,
that
she
car
said,
still
the
there?
line is already formed. I will help you as soon as it's your turn. For a second, Grady just stared at her, as if he had not
Your
expected
total is
resistance,
correct.
as if the idea itself offended him. Do you know who I am? He asked, leaning closer. Yes, she replied, and I still have to follow store policy. It was a
Move.
small decision, a simple one, but in that
Do you know
moment,
who I
it
am?
felt heavy. Aisha believed that doing the right thing
yeah,
mattered,
Mr. Cow.
that rules existed for a reason, that a uniform did not erase
I
them.
follow store
She believed
policy.
that if she stayed respectful, if she stayed within the lines, nothing bad could happen. Grady's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. Policy, he repeated softly. He stepped
didn't see
closer,
anything.
invading her space. You think policy means anything in here? The man
Policy
behind him
doesn't
took a step
protect
back. Someone near the soda aisle turned away, pretending not to see. Aisha noticed all of it. The way people withdrew,
break
the way the
rules.
air shifted. Still, she stood her ground. Sir, please wait your turn. For a brief moment, something flickered behind Grady's eyes. Not anger yet.
Stay still.
Something colder, calculating, as if he were deciding how far he could go. He leaned forward
Let
until his
go of
face
me.
was only inches from hers, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear it. You really think this place protects you? The room felt smaller the moment Grady
enough.
leaned in.
Buys me almost okay.
Not because he raised his voice, not because he shouted or cursed. It was
Digestion.
worse than that. His tone
Take your
dropped,
hand off her.
slow and deliberate, carrying the confidence of someone who had learned that fear worked best
This
when it was
is police
controlled.
business.
Aisha could smell the cold on his jacket, mixed with something sour
is-
underneath. His presence swallowed the narrow space behind the counter.
This is
The man
assault.
he had shoved earlier stepped farther
What
back,
is your
eyes
problem?
fixed on the floor. No one said a word. Grady straightened slightly and looked around the store
Johnny,
as if taking
you think you
inventory.
won?
The cameras, the customers, the exits. Then his eyes returned to Aisha, sharp and
They're watching.
unblinking. You're making this difficult for yourself, he said. All
They're
over
watching.
nothing. Aisha felt her pulse in her throat. She knew what he wanted.
She
An
caused this.
apology. Step back. A quiet surrender that would let him leave satisfied. She didn't give
Is
it.
it?
Sir, she said, keeping her voice steady, I'm just doing my job.
That car again.
That was the moment something shifted. Grady's jaw tightened. His lips
It's
pressed
probably
together,
nothing.
then parted into a thin, humorless smile. He leaned forward again, resting one hand on the counter. The glass rattled softly under the pressure. Your job, he repeated. He laughed once,
feel
low and
unsafe.
dry. You people always say that. A few customers exchanged glances. Someone near the door picked up their basket and set it down, backing
Hello?
away. The heater hummed overhead, loud in the sudden stillness. Aisha didn't move. She felt fear, yes,
inside.
but underneath it was something else. A quiet refusal. She had followed the rules. She had spoken respectfully. She had done everything right.
Stay quiet.
If she backed down now, she knew she would carry it with her long after this moment ended. I can call my manager, she said. But I won't break policy.
Malik?
Grady's hand slid off. The counter, you don't get to tell me what you won't do, he said quietly.
They took him.
Before she could react, his fingers wrapped around her wrist. It happened fast enough that Aisha didn't realize what was happening until pain shot up her arm. His grip was tight, deliberate, meant to be felt. A sharp gasp escaped her before she could stop it. Let go of me, she said, louder now. The words echoed in the store, thin but clear. Grady pulled her wrist up slightly, forcing her closer. His voice dropped again, low enough to carry only to her ears. You think anyone here is going to help you? Her heart hammered. She could feel eyes on her, but no one stepped forward. No one spoke. The uniform did its work. She met his stare anyway. You're overstepping, she said. You need to let go.
Stay with
That
me.
was the choice. Grady's expression hardened. Whatever restraint he had been holding onto snapped. His hand came up and struck her across the face. The sound cracked through the store, sharp and unmistakable. Aisha's head snapped to the side. Her cheek burned instantly,
I'm still here.
heat blooming beneath the skin. She staggered but stayed upright, gripping the edge of the counter with her free hand to keep from falling. A woman near the aisle let out a small cry. Someone else turned away completely. Grady stood close enough that she could feel
It
his
is for
breath.
me.
This is what happens when you forget your place, he said. Aisha's vision blurred for a second, tears stinging her
ours.
eyes. Not from weakness.
This is ours.
From shock. From the sudden understanding that this had gone somewhere it should never have gone.
I'm
Before
ready.
anyone could move, before anyone could find their voice, a sound came from behind the store.
Take your
The
time.
storage room door opened. Just a few inches at first. Enough. The sound from the back of the store was easy to miss. A soft scrape, cardboard shifting against concrete. The kind of noise that usually meant nothing at all, but in that moment, it cut through the tension like a blade. Grady's head turned. Slightly, irritation flashing across his face. His grip on Aisha's wrist tightened for a brief second, enough to remind her that he still controlled the space between them. Stay out of it, he barked toward the back without fully looking. This doesn't concern you. Aisha's breathing came shallow and uneven. Her cheek throbbed where his hand had struck her. She could taste blood at the corner of her mouth. Still, she didn't lower her eyes. Let me go, she said again. This time her voice shook, but it didn't break. The storage room door opened wider. A tall man stepped into the light. Mason Hale did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He didn't even look angry at first glance. He wore a plain jacket over a work shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands empty. His hair was cropped short, his posture relaxed in a way that felt deliberate, but his eyes were fixed on Grady's hand. Mason had been in the back checking inventory when he heard the shift in the store, not the slap itself at first, the silence that followed it. He knew that silence. He had heard it before in places where things went wrong quickly. He took in the scene in seconds. Aisha pressed against the counter, her face flushed and swelling. Grady standing too close. The customers frozen, uncertain. Something cold settled in his chest. Grady turned fully now, annoyed at the interruption. What do you want? He snapped. This is police business. Mason took one step forward, not aggressive, not hesitant either. There's no police business here, he said calmly. Just a man hurting someone who can't fight back. Grady scoffed. You got no idea who you're talking to, he said. Go back to the stockroom before you make things worse for yourself. Mason didn't move. Instead, he spoke to Aisha without taking his eyes off Grady. Are you okay? The question landed softly, but it cracked something open inside her. She swallowed hard. No, she said, but I'm standing. That answer did something to Mason. His jaw tightened just slightly. Grady laughed, sharp and dismissive. See, she's fine. Now step away. Mason took another step forward, close enough now that the space between him and Grady felt intentional. Take your hand off her, he said. The store seemed to hold its breath. Grady stared at him, disbelief flickering into anger. You don't give me orders, he said. Especially not in my uniform. Mason's voice didn't change. I'm not ordering you. I'm giving you a chance. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Grady's face. Not fear, not yet, but calculation. You threatening a cop? Grady asked, his voice rising so others could hear it. Mason shook his head slightly. I'm stopping an assault. The word hung in the air. Aisha felt something shift behind her ribs. Someone had said it out loud. Someone had named it. Grady's grip loosened just enough for her to pull her wrist free. She stepped back instinctively, putting the counter between them. Her legs trembled, but she stayed upright. Grady noticed. His eyes darkened. "You think this guy saves you?" He snapped at her. "You think he protects you." Mason stepped fully between them now, his back to Aisha. The movement was quiet, but absolute. "That's enough," he said. Grady's pride flared. His hand curled into a fist. "You don't know when to stop, do you?" he said, stepping closer. Mason didn't retreat. "Take your hand off her." This time, the words were not a request. They were final. By the end of the week, Officer Daniel Grady was officially suspended. The word spread quickly, though no one ever said it out loud. It moved the way uncomfortable truths always did in that neighborhood, passed in lowered voices, half sentences, glances that lingered just long enough to feel intentional. Administrative leave, pending review. On paper, it looked like accountability, a pause, a consequence. In reality, it felt like a door quietly closing while something else slipped in through the cracks. Bright Mart stayed open. Customers still came in for milk and cigarettes and lottery tickets. The scanner still beeped. The fridge still hummed, but the rhythm was off. Conversation stopped when Aisha stepped closer. Smiles felt practiced, thin. Some people avoided her register entirely. Others stared too long, their eyes carrying questions they didn't ask. What really happened? Why did a cop get suspended over a cashier? What part wasn't being told? By midweek, patrol cars began to park across the street more often. Not for calls, just sitting there. Engines running. Officers inside scrolling on their phones, watching the door. One afternoon, a regular customer named Leon was stopped outside. "Hey man," one officer said casually. "Mind showing some ID?" Leon laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. Then he saw their faces. Inside the store, Aisha watched through the glass as Leon handed over his wallet, his shoulders tightening. He glanced back at her, confusion and embarrassment mixing on his face. When he came in a few minutes later, he didn't meet her eyes. It happened again the next day, and the day after that. People started whispering. Maybe she caused trouble. Maybe she exaggerated. Maybe she wanted attention. Aisha heard none of it directly. That was almost worse. It floated around her, just out of reach, heavy and invisible. At home, Malik noticed the change before she did. He sat at the kitchen table, textbooks open but untouched, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. His breathing was steady, but his eyes kept drifting toward the window. "There's a car outside again," he said quietly. Aisha glanced over. A dark sedan sat across the street, parked too neatly, its windows tinted. She hadn't heard it arrive. "It's probably nothing," she said, forcing a lightness she didn't feel. Malik didn't answer right away. "It's the third night," he said. "Same car." Her chest tightened. Malik had always been careful. He had to be. His heart condition meant every spike. Of fear, every rush of adrenaline came with a price. She could see it now in the way his hand pressed briefly against his chest when a siren passed outside. At school, kids had started asking questions. His teacher called Aisha after Malik asked to be excused from class twice in one morning. He says he feels unsafe. The teacher explained gently. Aisha didn't know how to answer that. One evening, as she walked home from her shift, she noticed footsteps behind her. When she stopped, they stopped. When she turned, there was no one there. She reached her building and locked the door behind her, her hands shaking as she slid the bolt into place. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, listening to the quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that waited. She thought about the suspension, about how everyone acted like it was the end of the story, like the problem had been handled, but fear didn't feel handled. It felt organized. Deliberate.
Move.
She looked out the window again at the parked car, its headlights finally turning off. In that moment, something settled into place in her mind, cold and clear. He didn't lose power. He just stopped wearing the uniform. The next few days moved slowly, like the city itself was holding its breath. Aisha began to notice patterns she wished she could ignore. The timing of things, the way certain faces appeared more often near Bright Mart, then vanished the moment she tried to focus on them. Men who didn't shop, cars that idled too long, a presence that felt intentional without ever crossing a line anyone could point to. At work, her manager pulled her aside near the beverage coolers. "I'm not saying you did anything wrong," he said, keeping his voice low. "But people are nervous. Corporate doesn't like nervous." Aisha nodded. She had learned when to listen
go
without
of me.
responding. Just keep your head down for a while, he added. Let things cool off. She almost laughed at that. Almost. Cooling off implied heat would fade on its
That's
own.
enough, Boswell.
What she felt wasn't heat. It was pressure. One afternoon, a patrol officer walked into the store and stood near the entrance, hands resting casually on his belt. He didn't buy anything. He didn't speak. He just stood there, eyes scanning the room, landing briefly on Aisha before moving on. A woman in line leaned toward the man behind her and whispered something. He shook his head slightly. When Aisha rang them up, their voices went quiet. That evening, she found Malik sitting on the couch with his backpack still on, staring at the blank television screen. Did someone follow you home again? He asked, without looking at her. She paused. Why would you think that? Because you locked the door twice, he said. And you didn't even take your shoes off. The truth sat heavy between them. I just want things to go back to normal, Malik said. His voice was small, careful, like he was afraid that wanting too much might make his heart race again. Aisha sat beside him and wrapped an arm around his shoulders. She could feel how tense he was, how his body stayed ready even while resting. It will, she said. I promise. But she didn't believe it anymore. Later that night, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You should have stayed quiet. No name. No explanation. Her fingers went cold. She didn't respond. She deleted it.
Hello?
Then she sat there, staring at the screen, long after it went dark, listening to Malik's breathing down the hall, counting each inhale like it mattered. Outside, a car door closed softly. Footsteps moved away. Aisha stood and looked through the curtain just enough to see the dark sedan pulling away from the curb. That was when she understood the shape of what was happening. The suspension hadn't stopped anything. It had only changed the rules. The pressure had shifted from public to private, from visible to subtle, from a uniform to something harder to name. Whatever she thought she had stood up to at the register had followed her home. And it wasn't finished. Aisha knew something was wrong the moment she opened the door. The apartment didn't sound right. There was no music from Malik's room, no familiar shuffle of his sneakers kicked off near the couch, no soft cough he always tried to hide when the air was too dry. Just silence. Thick and hollow, like the space had been emptied out. Malik? She called, her voice instinctively careful, as if loudness itself might break something. No answer. She stepped inside and felt it immediately. The wrongness. The couch cushions were out of place. A chair had been pushed back too far. Papers lay scattered across the coffee table, not thrown in anger, but spread deliberately, as if someone wanted her to notice. Nothing was stolen. Her laptop sat untouched. Her purse was still on the hook. The TV was there. The drawer where she kept cash was closed. This wasn't a robbery. Her heart started pounding so hard it hurt. Aisha moved down the hallway, her steps slow, forced. Malik's bedroom door was open. The bed was rumpled. His backpack lay on the floor, half unzipped. The heart monitor he sometimes wore at night sat on the desk, unplugged. And then she saw it. A single sheet of paper placed neatly on his pillow. No envelope, no explanation, just 2 words written in block letters. Come alone.
I'm ready.
The room tilted. Aisha grabbed the edge of the doorframe to keep herself upright. Her breath came in sharp bursts, too fast, too shallow. She felt the panic surge, hot and immediate, threatening to drown out everything else. Malik was gone, not missing, not lost, taken. She stumbled back into the living room, her hands shaking so badly she dropped her phone the first time she tried to pick it up. When she finally managed to dial, she didn't look at the screen. She didn't have to. Mason answered on the second ring. Aisha, he said, something's wrong. They took him.
Good evening.
She choked. Malik. They took my brother. There was a pause on the line. Not hesitation.
Just
calculation. Where are you? Mason asked. At home. I just got here. Don't go anywhere. Lock the door. There was movement on his end. Keys. A door opening. Did they leave anything? Mason asked. Yes. A note. It says, come alone.
That wasn't me.
Mason exhaled slowly, a sound that carried weight. They want control, he said, and they want you scared enough to listen. I can't lose him, Aisha said. Her voice broke completely now. He's sick.
Why is that
he can't handle this.
There?
You won't, Mason said, but you're not doing this by yourself. There was something different in his tone, not reassurance.
Your total
resolve.
is correct.
Mason arrived 20 minutes later. He didn't knock. He stepped inside as if the apartment were already his responsibility. He surveyed the room the way he used to scan spaces overseas.
Do you know
Corners,
who I am?
windows, the hallway, the note. This wasn't Grady alone, he said quietly. Aisha looked up at him, tears streaking her face. How do you know? Because this is organized, Mason replied. Too clean, too quiet. This is pressure, not rage. He folded the note once and slipped it into his pocket. If you were the target, they would have hurt you already, he continued. They took Malik because they know you'll move for him. Her chest tightened. So what do we do? Mason met her eyes. We go. But not the way they expect. They drove in silence, the city blurring past the windows. The address Mason had traced from the note led them to the industrial edge of town, where old warehouses sat abandoned like rusted skeletons. Snow began to fall again, soft and steady, muffling the world. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and hollow. One light burned inside. Mason stopped the car a block away. Stay close, he said. And no matter what happens, listen to me. Aisha nodded, though fear wrapped around her chest like wire. They stepped inside. The air was cold and stale, carrying the smell of oil and damp concrete. Shadows stretched long across the floor. A voice echoed from deeper within. You came. Aisha's heart slammed against her ribs. Then the lights snapped on. Malik was there, tied to a chair, pale, terrified. Before Aisha could scream, something metallic clicked behind them. Mason froze. That's when he saw it. The bomb. The device sat beneath the table like it belonged there. Wires taped together with careless confidence. A small digital timer blinking red. Not sophisticated, not rushed either. Built by someone who knew exactly how much fear it took to make people freeze. Aisha's knees nearly buckled. Malik looked up at her, his face streaked with tears, his breathing uneven. His chest rose too fast, panic already pushing his heart past what it could handle. Aisha, he whispered, his voice cracked. I tried to stay calm, I really did. She took a step forward without thinking. Stop, Mason said sharply, his hand shooting out to block her. She stared at him, desperate. That's my brother. I know, Mason said, but that's what they're counting on. A slow clap echoed from the shadows. Daniel Grady stepped into the light. He wasn't in uniform, just jeans and a dark jacket, but the posture was the same. The confidence, the ownership of the room. I told you to come alone, Grady said, his voice smooth, almost amused. Aisha's hands clenched into fists. You said nothing about hurting him, she said. Her voice shook, but it carried. Grady smiled. I didn't hurt him. Yet. I just borrowed him. Consider it a conversation starter. Mason shifted slightly, positioning himself between Grady and Aisha without making it obvious. This doesn't end the way you think it does, Mason said. Grady laughed. You military types always think there's an end. There isn't. There's only pressure and who breaks first. He gestured toward Malik. Your sister decided to be brave, Grady continued. That makes people nervous. People like me. Aisha felt something inside her tear loose.
That's a bomb.
He's a kid, she said. He's sick. You know that. Grady's eyes flicked to Malik for half a second. No sympathy there. Just calculation. That's why he's effective, Grady replied. Silence works best when it hurts. The timer beeped once. Aisha gasped. Mason's voice dropped, controlled and urgent. Grady, listen to me. You pull this trigger and you lose everything. Not your badge. Your protection. Grady tilted his head. You think I'm standing here alone? That was the moment Mason understood. This was never about revenge. It was a warning. A shadow moved near the far wall, just briefly.
This isn't over.
Someone else was there, watching, not stepping forward. Mason took a step toward Malik, slow and deliberate. If this goes off, Grady, you don't walk away from it.
It is for me.
Not ever. Grady's smile tightened. Neither do you. Without warning, Mason lunged. Everything happened at once. The chair tipped. Malik screamed.
This is ours.
Aisha ran forward as Mason grabbed Malik and cut the ties with a knife she never saw him pull. Grady shouted something she couldn't hear over the roar in her ears. Mason shoved Malik toward Aisha.
Take your time.
Run, he yelled. They ran. The blast tore through the warehouse like a living thing. Heat slammed into Aisha's back as she dove forward, wrapping her body around Malik. The force threw them across the concrete. The sound swallowed everything. Then silence. For a moment, Aisha couldn't hear, couldn't feel. Then pain rushed back in, sharp and real. She lifted her head. The warehouse behind them was burning, flames licking through broken windows. Smoke poured into the sky. Mason stumbled out moments later, his jacket torn, blood running down his forehead. He was breathing, alive. Malik coughed weakly, but his heart was still beating, still fighting. They made it to the street before the roof collapsed. As sirens approached in the distance, Aisha looked back one last time. Through the smoke, across the empty lot, a figure stood watching. Not Grady, someone else. Someone who hadn't needed to step forward. Then the figure turned and disappeared into the dark. Thus, truth did not arrive all at once. It surfaced in fragments, in documents that did not line up the way they should have, in phone records that showed patterns no one wanted to explain, in quiet conversations held behind closed doors, where voices lowered not out of fear of being wrong, but fear of being heard. Grady had not acted alone. That realization came slowly for Aisha, not as a shock, but as a heavy understanding that settled into her chest and refused to leave. In the days after the warehouse explosion, the story in the news stayed small. An abandoned building, an accidental fire, no mention of a bomb, no mention of Malik, no mention of why a suspended police officer had been anywhere near the scene. Mason noticed it immediately. "They are containing it," he said one evening, standing in the hospital hallway while Malik slept under steady monitors. "This isn't damage control. This is protection." Protection for who, Aisha asked. Mason looked at her for a long moment before answering. For people who don't wear uniforms. He had survived the blast with more than scars. In the chaos of the escape, he had grabbed something from the warehouse, a small device dropped near the back wall, a burner phone, still warm. Mason did not take it to the local police. He went over their heads. A former contact from his service days met him 2 counties over. Federal oversight, quiet jurisdiction, no loyalty to the local department. They listened. The phone led to others. Messages that never used names, payments that moved through shell accounts, surveillance photos taken long before Aisha ever stood up to Grady at the register. This was not retaliation. It was enforcement. Grady was a tool, loud, reckless, useful when intimidation needed to be visible. But behind him was something far more careful, a group of men who had learned how to bend systems without ever touching them directly. Business owners, union intermediaries, a city contractor with friends on the force, people who understood that power did not need to shout if it could simply apply pressure. When the case finally reached court, the room was packed. Aisha sat in the front row, hands folded tightly in her lap. Mason sat 2 seats behind her. Malik stayed home, still too fragile for crowds, watching the live stream with his heart monitor quietly ticking beside him. The prosecutor laid out the evidence piece by piece. Security footage from Brightmart that had never made it into the original report. Audio pulled from a nearby ATM camera. Grady's voice, clear, unmistakable. Witnesses came forward, not heroes, just tired people who had decided they were done being afraid. One of Grady's associates took the stand last. A man who had once laughed with him over drinks, who had accepted favors, who had believed the system would always protect him too. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. All he had to do was confirm that Grady had never acted without permission, that there were rules even Grady followed, that when Grady crossed a line, it was because someone else had told him where the line was. Aisha listened, her stomach twisting. She had spent weeks wondering what she could have done differently, how she might have avoided all of this. Now she understood that nothing she did would have changed the outcome. She was never the cause. She was the test. When the verdict came down, the courtroom did not erupt. There were no cheers, no relief, just a quiet exhale, like a room that had been holding its breath for too long. Grady stood as the cuffs were placed around his wrists. For a moment, his confidence cracked. Then his eyes found Aisha. There was no apology there, no regret, just a look that carried a promise. Not of revenge exactly, but of continuation, of a belief that systems outlived individuals. As he was led away, he leaned just close enough for her to hear him. "This isn't over." Aisha did not respond. For the first time, she didn't need to. She finally understood what she had been standing against, and why the fight had never been just about a small store. The sentence came down on a Tuesday morning under fluorescent courtroom lights that made everyone look a little older than they were. Officer Daniel Grady was convicted on multiple counts: assault, abuse of authority, conspiracy, obstruction, kidnapping by proxy. The judge did not raise his voice when he read the verdict, but every word landed with precision, like a door closing one bolt at a time. When the number of years was announced, a low murmur rippled through the room. Grady did not react. He stood perfectly still, jaw locked, eyes forward. The kind of posture a man learns when he believes losing emotion is the same as losing power. Only once did his gaze flick sideways toward the gallery, toward Aisha. She did not meet his eyes, not because she was afraid, but because she no longer needed to prove anything to him. The law had finally done its job. Late, imperfect, but real. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Reporters called her name. Strangers wanted statements, symbols, sound bites. Aisha kept walking. Justice, she had learned, was loud in public and lonely afterward. Malik's recovery was slower than the doctors expected. Physically, his heart stabilized. The monitors stopped alarming. The medications worked. His body, young and resilient, did what it was supposed to do, but some nights he woke up gasping. Sometimes he refused to sleep unless the lights were on. Sometimes he flinched when a car door slammed too hard outside the apartment. He stopped wearing his bracelet. The one she had found on the floor that night said it made his chest feel tight. Aisha sat with him through every episode. She held his hand when his breathing went shallow. She learned the sound of fear before it turned into panic. She smiled more than she felt because she knew he watched her face for cues on how scared he was allowed to be. They survived, she reminded herself. But survival left marks. The city did not feel the same anymore. Even after Grady was gone, even after the names behind him were exposed, something had shifted. Neighbors were kinder, but also cautious. Too cautious. The kind of politeness that comes from guilt rather than comfort. Brightmart offered Aisha more hours, a raise, a quiet promise of protection. It wasn't enough. Mason was the one who said it out loud first. If you stay, he told her one night as they stood on the apartment balcony, watching traffic slide past like distant currents of light, you will always be looking over your shoulder, not because you're weak, but because you know too much now. She didn't argue. Deep down, she already knew. The network Grady belonged to had been damaged, not destroyed. Too many people had walked away untouched. Too many names had never made it into courtrooms or headlines. Mason himself was being pulled deeper into things he couldn't talk about. Meetings, calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room. The kind of silence that meant there were battles happening elsewhere, out of reach, but very real. You could come with us, he offered once, somewhere quieter, temporary. Aisha shook her head. No. Malik needs something that feels new, not hidden, so she made the decision she never wanted to make. She sold what little furniture she owned, packed boxes slowly, let Malik choose which books came with them, which memories were allowed to travel forward. On the morning they left, she asked the driver to take a longer route. Brightmart stood the same as always. The same cracked sidewalk, the same faded sign, the same glass doors that reflected the sky like nothing had ever happened inside. Aisha stood across the street, hands in her coat pockets, breathing in the cold air. She remembered the sound of the register, the rhythm of customers, the way she had believed that doing the right thing would keep her safe. She was older now, not hardened, just clearer. Malik touched her sleeve. You ready? She nodded. As the car pulled away, Aisha looked back one last time. Everything started here, she thought, but it could never stay here. The town Aisha moved to did not look like a fresh start in the way movies promised. It was smaller, quieter, the kind of place where grocery stores closed early and people waved without knowing your name. She rented a modest apartment above a laundromat, close enough that the low hum of the dryers became part of the night. Malik went to a new school where no one knew his history, where his teachers spoke gently and never asked why sudden noises made him tense. Their life did not become easier overnight. Money was still tight. Aisha still worked long hours, now at a pharmacy where customers complained about prices she did not set and policies she did not write. Malik still carried his medications in a careful row on the kitchen counter. Some mornings he was quiet in a way that worried her, staring too long at nothing, as if his Mind
Malik?
had wandered back to a place his body had escaped,
They
but
took
something
him.
inside Aisha had changed.
They took
She
him.
no longer mistook silence for safety. She no longer believed that obedience
Don't
was
go
the
alone.
same as protection. At night, after Malik fell asleep, she sometimes sat by
Don't
the
go
window
alone.
and scrolled through her phone. The story had grown legs of its own. It showed up in places she did not expect. Opinion
Okay.
columns, community panels, college classrooms. A grainy
That's a
clip
bomb.
from Brightmart replayed again and again, analyzed frame by people who had never set foot in that neighborhood. Strangers used her name in sentences that
This-
started debates. Some praised
this
her
is
courage.
pressure.
Others questioned her choices. A few tried to soften the story, to make it easier to swallow by sanding down its
okay.
sharpest edges. Aisha learned not to read the comments. What mattered more were the messages she received quietly. From a woman who finally
You're
filed a
safe.
complaint she had been sitting on for years. From a man who admitted he had looked away once and would not
I'm
do it
still
again.
here.
From a retired officer who said nothing publicly, but wrote simply, "I should have spoken
This isn't
sooner."
over.
The echo spread, not because the story was extraordinary, but because it was familiar. People recognized it in their own lives. In moments,
It is
they had
for me.
swallowed their anger. In days, they had convinced themselves that keeping their head down was the same as surviving. Mason checked in
It's
from time to
ours.
time, never with details.
This is
just
ours.
enough to let her know he was still moving, still fighting battles that did not make headlines. When he asked how
I'm
she
ready.
was, she answered honestly. Not better, she said once, just clearer. That seemed
Take
to
your time.
satisfy him. On a cold evening months later, Aisha walked Malik home from school. Snow had just started to fall, light and slow, the way it did before settling in. Malik talked about a science project, about a kid who sat next to him and laughed too loud. Ordinary things. She listened, grateful for
I'm
the
home.
sound of his voice, for the fact that ordinary had returned even if it came with scars. They stopped at the corner before crossing the street. A car passed. Malik flinched,
Good evening.
then steadied himself. Aisha noticed, but did not rush him. She waited. Let him take the step when he was ready.
Just
That was
tired.
what she had learned. Justice did not arrive like a rescue. It arrived like a construction site. Slow, messy, built by
quiet.
hands that shook, but did not stop. Back then, she had thought she was just a cashier following a rule. Now she understood what she had really done.
That
She had
wasn't me.
refused to disappear. And because of that, others had found the courage to stay visible too. In the end,
was a
the
long
situation
shift.
reached far beyond that small store, and so did the truth.